Welcome all of you to the Boston College campus to the third in series of events related to the church in the 21st century that are sponsored by the Lynch School of Education. Last fall we looked at the impact, the psychological and spiritual impact of child abuse. In February we looked at curriculum for safety, sexual safety in schools. And tonight we, I suppose, in a way anticipate Easter with a hopeful message that comes to us from Dr. Joseph Kelly. Very grateful that Joe came to be with us here at Boston College. He is the director of the Center for Augustinian Spirituality at Merrimack College in Andover, Massachusetts. He has two doctorates, one from Andover Newton, D.Min., and a doctorate in psychology and religion from Boston University. He is author of the forthcoming book, Faith in Exile, Seeking Hope in Times of Doubt, that will be published by Paulus Press this coming July. He's going to speak to us again, a hopeful message and a message of challenge, and he's going to describe what bishops and leaders in the church can learn from teachers. I think certainly an appropriate topic for all of us gathered here, an appropriate topic to be sponsored by the Lynch School of Education. So please join me in welcoming to Boston College campus, Dr. Joe Kelly. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Father O'Keefe. And thank you for this honor, really. It's a special honor to address teachers and teachers of teachers. I hope I can return the honor this evening by sharing my conviction with you that teachers are symbols of hope, both for the world in general and for the church in particular. Some of you are dedicated to Catholic education from primary school to graduate school. The church, we who are the church, are in your debt. The values and the virtues of Catholicism, the message of the gospel, the revelation of God's infinite love for all peoples, all children, this is the meta-curriculum to which you have dedicated your professional lives. You are sacraments of hope, both in and for the church and for the world. Some teachers exercise their art, apply their pedagogy in public schools or other private schools. I believe that they are also sacraments of hope, symbols of commitment for the world and for the church. It's my thesis this evening that good teachers everywhere have a lesson and a love that the church, the Catholic Church, and its leadership needs to take to heart in the present crisis. If you will, the blood of loving professional commitment that courses through the veins of teachers could be transfused in the body of Christ to help strengthen and heal us in the present malaise. The current crisis in the church has shaken its very foundations. Cracks run throughout the layer of confidence in our Episcopal leadership. The teaching voice of bishops, in many cases, has dried out or dried up, desiccated by a want of honesty. The credibility of bishops has crumbled like sand, undermining the institutional church. Good and dedicated priests strain and struggle to reinforce and buttress the structures of faith. That's difficult work for their sometimes discouraged fraternity. By contrast, teachers generally still enjoy the confidence of society. Despite labor problems, and you know these issues better than I, despite disputes about testing, even despite the occasional teacher who has violated the sacred trust of the classroom, teaching is generally in our country respected for what it is, a noble work that ensures the continuity of culture and opens up the world for the next generations. As a profession, you still command esteem, you enjoy respect, and you inspire hope. Each year, thousands of young people still choose to imitate you, to embrace a life of teaching. Still others put aside their former profession and retool themselves to teach. I call you who are teachers sacraments of hope. Hope, as you know, is one of the three theological virtues, together with faith and love. We understand without too much difficulty that faith and love are active virtues. We talk about making an act of faith. Although we usually receive our faith from our families, for example, sooner or later we have to choose to believe. We know that growth in the spiritual life means moving from a passive faith to an active faith. So with love, we receive love, but we know that to be complete, love, like faith, must also be given, acted upon. We are called from being loved to loving, from receiving love to making acts of love that form and shape our lives and the lives of others. Hope, however, is commonly understood as a passive virtue and left at that. We presume hope deals with things out of our control, like the weather, or the war, or the stock market, or life after death. Hope seems to be the virtue of standing ready to receive, expecting and yearning for something that is good and good for us, but something nonetheless for which we can, as we say, only hope. Hope by its nature seems to be the very virtue of passivity. But in truth, hope is also, like faith and love, an active virtue. Hope means not only waiting for the future, it means investing in the future. As a theological virtue, Christian hope means anticipating eternal life with God. That's its classic definition. But Christian hope also means committing ourselves to the future of this world. We believe that eternal life, our sharing in God's life, has already begun through baptism. While that new life will reach its fullness beyond death, we are called to appropriate, to affirm, and celebrate it here and now for the transformation of this world. Our hope in eternal life inspires and requires us to actively commit our earthly energies to the common good. As our Jewish brothers and sisters would say, we are called by hope to heal the world, tikkun olam, to heal the world. There are three basic kinds of hopeful commitment, three ways of acting, of activating hope. Commitments we make to another person, commitments we make to an idea or an ideal, and commitments to a community of persons who share our idea or ideals. First, commitment to persons. In marriage, in lasting friendships, we commit ourselves to another human being. We pledge to walk with her or him into the future. We commit ourselves to our children, to our nieces, our nephews, our grandchildren, our students, by helping them walk, by walking with them into the future. Secondly, we can commit ourselves to an idea or an ideal. An idea or an ideal we value so much that we want to ensure its continuity, its availability for future generations. So people will commit their whole lives to art, to music, to philosophy, to relief of world hunger, to peace, to teaching, to the poor. In a passionate commitment to such ideals, some may forego marriage so they can devote themselves solely to the cause. Their dedication defines their very self. Dedicated lives lived in service of an ideal makes of that ideal a good and true and beautiful gift to future generations. And the third type of commitment is to the communities of interest and dedication that support and surround such ideals or ideas. The synagogue, the church, a political party, a community of artists, the community of teachers, of trade unionists, of Jesuits, all such intentional communities call for and receive deep commitment from their adherents. All three kinds of commitment, on the personal level, on the level of idea or ideals, and on the level of the community, all three kinds of commitments are acts of hope, are ways of activating hope. Teaching is an act of hope, and it's an active expression of hope on all three of those levels: personal, ideal, and communal. You know that teaching involves a level of personal commitment in friendship with your students. It's a particular kind of friendship informed by the roles of teacher and student, but nonetheless a friendship. Isn't commitment to your students an important measure of good teaching? Teaching is also a commitment to ideas and ideals, the values and the causes that you as teachers cherish and want to impart. And teaching is a commitment to community, to the community of students, the community of teachers, the community of families who entrust their children to you. Teaching is a threefold expression of hope, a trinity of commitments. Even more, teaching is not only one of the many ways of expressing, of activating hope. It's an act of hope par excellence. In very few human activities do we find this comprehensive constellation of commitments dedicated to the future of students and society. Teachers and counselors are among very few professions whose goal is to bring their clients to their level and beyond. Doctors and lawyers don't do that. But teachers, through their commitments, bring their students to where they are and hope that they go further. You strive to end dependence and liberate those you serve. So I affirm that you are sacraments. You are outward signs, efficacious, effective signs of the inner human theological virtue of hope. You effect, you make real by your work. You bring to birth the hope conceived by grace in the human heart. Because of this many-layered commitment of your profession, you are sacraments of hope in the world, but you are also sacraments of hope in and for the church. More specifically, I believe, you are or could be sacraments of hope for church leaders. My friend Mary Moran will tell you I do not make it a habit to give advice to the hierarchy. But you invited me here this evening, so I'm emboldened. I believe that it is important today in the Catholic Church for the hierarchy of our church to realize that teachers, whether you work within the schools of the church or the schools of the Commonwealth, teachers can be sacraments of hope for them by being attentive to the dynamics and the demands of your profession. Church leaders, I believe, would draw inspiration and encouragement for their own ministry. But they need to pay attention, careful, sustained attention to your work. They would, I believe, draw hope and inspiration from your threefold commitment to students, to ideas or ideals, and to community. by observing you, they would learn how to better exercise their episcopal office. Now, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. I would not be so foolish as to offer advice to the hierarchy on my own. So, let me ask the help of a particular bishop, a bishop who himself had been a teacher by profession before becoming a bishop. For a few years, he actually taught the equivalent of middle school. He also tutored extensively to make extra money. Then he taught rhetoric at the university level in 3 different cities for almost 7 or 8 years. He wrote a book which he called The Teacher. In that book, he comments extensively on his own ideas about pedagogy. In his autobiography, he has a lot to say about the weaknesses of the school and the university systems of his own day. He comments in his autobiography about the behavior of students, his own behavior as a student, the motivation of students for higher education, about the role of politics in the curriculum, and about the place of values in education. In trying to bring together the hope-filled commitment of teachers and the ministry of bishops, let me appeal to the writing and the thought of Augustine, Bishop of Hippo. Aurelius Augustinus was bishop of the North African city of Hippo Regius in the 4th and 5th century. Appealing to St. Augustine about teaching has its problems. When he decided to become a Catholic Christian, he gave up his teaching post at the imperial city of Milan in northern Italy. He had, by the age of 32, risen to the very top of his profession. His post as imperial rhetor, as the spokesperson for the emperor, would be something like a combination of holding the preeminent chair in teaching at Columbia University's teaching college or the Lynch School of Education, and at the same time being the PR person for the President of the United States. All of that was rolled into the position he had in Milan. Augustine's successor in that office of imperial rhetor actually became an emperor subsequently. So there he was, 32 years old, at the top of his game, and he quit. He not only quit, he repudiated publicly and repeatedly his former profession as a teacher. His teaching post in Milan, and previous to that in Rome and in Carthage in North Africa, involved teaching law students and future politicians. He had had enough of this. In his famous Confessions, he writes, describing his years of teaching rhetoric to older students, "I was a hawker of words, a seller of slogans." The Latin is venditor verborum, which is a great phrase. Teaching, he thought, should involve leading students to a knowledge of truth. His job as a teacher of rhetoric, basically of literature and of public speaking, of communication studies, in the late Roman Empire, had been more about teaching students how to use words and manipulate ideas to obfuscate the truth in order to achieve their own political or juridical purposes. He was, he says, preparing students to be effective marketers. It was training them how, if you saw the movie or the show Chicago, it was training them how to spin out all that jazz, so to change public opinion, to win campaigns or sway fickle judges. Right? That's how he saw his teaching. As far as he was concerned, his teaching career had nothing to do with the pursuit of truth, and for Augustine, therefore, nothing to do with hope. After his conversion and his resignation from the imperial post of rhetor, he returned to his hometown in North Africa, present-day Algeria. His plan was to live in a community of scholarship and prayer with like-minded friends and converts. He had his state pension. He had the family farm. So he set up a little commune. And he tells us, studiously avoided any city in North Africa that was looking for a bishop. He wanted nothing to do with public life of any kind, religious or secular. And in the 5th century, bishops exercised both a religious and a secular function. He also knew that his former profession made him a very attractive candidate for bishop. One day in the year 391, he left his idyllic little commune and traveled a couple hundred miles north to the coast, to the port city of Hippo Regius. It's present-day Annaba in Algeria. He went there to interview a potential member for his little commune. He thought it safe to visit because Hippo already had a bishop. Indeed it did. It had the wily old Greek-speaking Valerius, who had for some time been thinking about a successor. Somehow he knew that Augustine, this brilliant former member of the imperial court, was in town. So when Augustine came to Sunday Mass in the Basilica, he was recognized by the congregation, who pushed him forward to Bishop Valerius. Valerius feigned surprise and then asked Augustine to be ordained priest for the good of the church. The crowd, probably rehearsed by Valerius, shouted their approval. In a sermon he delivered many years later, on the anniversary of his ordination, Augustine recalled that faithful day. Ordination was nothing he ever wanted. The episcopacy was something he had studiously avoided. He cried, he tells us, copious tears and tried to talk his way out of it. If only we could find such clerical reluctance today. But the famous rhetor was unconvincing, and the will of the people of God became Augustine's call to the priesthood, and a few years later to the bishopric in Hippo. The problem for Augustine was that once again he had to become a teacher. Not a teacher of rhetoric, but a teacher of the gospel. So he had to rethink what it meant to teach. Being thrown back into the public role of teaching meant that Augustine now had to reappropriate his profession, re-examine his own motivation for teaching in the first place and for leaving teaching. And whenever Augustine had to think through something, he wrote about it. You can find his thoughts on teaching again in his book, De Magistro, The Teacher, on his little book on the instruction of beginners. He also spends a good deal of time in the Confessions, in the early chapters of the Confessions, turning over his own early educational experiences and his subsequent career as a teacher. He gives us fascinating insights into the classrooms of the 4th and 5th century Roman Empire. We also learn a great deal about his reappropriation of teaching by studying his sermons. As bishop, it was primarily in his sermons, and we have over 500 of them, where he exercised his episcopal responsibility to teach. The sermons are a remarkable testimony to a brilliant teacher, addressing a largely illiterate congregation in lively colloquial Latin about the most profound religious and moral truths. Drawing from all of these sources, we can discern some basic principles that inform Augustinian pedagogy. And I would like to explore for you just 3. Augustine makes a crucial distinction in his work, The Teacher, between what he calls the truth of authority and the authority of truth. The truth of authority refers to the deference we pay to a teacher or a leader, political or religious, simply because they hold that office. They are in that office, therefore what they say must be the truth. It's the truth of authority. Augustine thinks there is a role, but a very limited one, for the truth of authority in any teaching situation. It can help to establish some order, the order of the classroom environment. But he was much more interested in what he called the authority of truth. He reverses the words. The authority of truth is the inner comprehension and conviction that a student generally comes to with the help of the teacher. The student believes and accepts a subject or an idea no longer simply because the teacher says so, simply because of the truth of the authority. No, the authority of truth means that the subject or idea itself becomes so compelling, so reasonable and evident that the student believes it and accepts it on its own merits. Every good teacher, he says, should work to lead their students to the authority of truth. Everything else the teacher thinks or says or uses is secondary. It's a means to the inner end of conviction, the student's inner conviction. Remarking on the role of the teacher, he wrote, "Who would be so foolish as to send their child to school to learn what the teacher thinks?" Isn't that a great line? Who would be so foolish to pay all that money to send their child to a school to learn what the teacher thinks? What the teacher thinks is important, but it's secondary. What the student comes to know, and to know with inner conviction and assurance, is primary. So that's the first basic principle that Augustine came to when he thought about teaching. A second point about education for Augustine is that the most fruitful atmosphere or environment for learning and teaching is community, and specifically a community of friends. When he was a student himself, a university student at Carthage, he describes in Book 4 of his Confessions the optimum learning environment. And I would like to quote at length. He says, he writes, "All kind of joy rejoiced my soul in their company," of his university friends, "to talk and to laugh and do each other kindnesses, to read pleasant books together, to pass from lightest jesting to talk of the deepest things and back again, to differ without rancor as one might differ with oneself, and when most rarely dissension arose, find our normal agreement all the sweeter for it, to teach each other or learn from each other, to be impatient for the absent, to welcome them with joy on their homecoming. These and like things proceeding from our hearts as we gave affection and received it back, and shown by face, by voice, by the eyes, and 1,000 other pleasing ways, ignited a flame which fused our very souls, and of many made us one." An important part of the good teacher, or the good principal's responsibility for Augustine, is to build and foster this kind of learning environment. No small task. In a sense, to tend the fire of learning so it draws students and teachers and families to the warmth of wisdom. A third point. Augustine wrote a lot about the virtue of humility. Part of his motivation was to try to move himself beyond the unbridled ambition of his younger adult years. And part was his conviction in faith that Christians must imitate the humility of Christ. Applied to teaching, he thought, humility means the teacher is always open to learning. The art of teaching involves ongoing learning when we remain dynamically and radically open to the students, to our students. You know better than I, this is the real discipline of teaching, to listen actively and with as much empathy and humility as we can muster to what our students are asking and wondering and thinking. That's work. That's work. If you look at the sermons of Augustine carefully, you will see that they were very much dialogic. as he preached and taught in his small seaside basilica, the dynamic would have been more like a mix of contemporary African American services, where the congregation responds repeatedly with acclamations and verses of psalms. We know that Augustine would say the first verse of a psalm, and the congregation would respond back with the second and subsequent verses. So I often, reading his sermons, you get the sense it was much more interactive. A cross between that and the British House of Parliament, because we also know that when people disagreed with Augustine, they would say so. Try to imagine this in the present context of today's church. One time he was preaching, he went on and on and on, and they started yelling, "It's enough." Remember, too, in antiquity, the bishop sat and everybody else stood. So he went on too far, and they shouted him down. So he got angry, and he went and sat down in his chair and refused to say anything more. Very different from a hushed cathedral where a passive flock sits with glazed over eyes and rigid limbs today. The learning, if you will, the learning, believing environment of Augustine's ecclesial classroom was less like breakfast at Tiffany's and more like family dinner at the Feingolds or the LaRussos, or the Sandowskis. But it's in that rich and rompous ecclesial context of his basilica that some of the greatest theology of the patristic era was taught and learned by the very simple, unlettered folk of his port city. The great bishop probably talked about humility so much because he himself struggled to remain humble and to remain open to the people. But his sermons reveal a teacher willing to dialogue, to listen, to engage, and to change, and also to proclaim. He did not back off when he thought he was right either. There are other aspects of Augustinian pedagogy. He speaks of the transformative power of learning and teaching, learning as a journey from knowledge to wisdom. We don't have time to elaborate, but the fact that such studied and profound reflections on the nature of teaching are found in a 4th, 5th century bishop suggests that there are some benefits in a contemporary dialogue between professional educators and the contemporary episcopacy. Such a dialogue might encourage a transfusion of hope, drawing from the hope inspired by your commitments as teachers and infusing it into the hierarchy, using, if you would, Augustine as the conduit, the theological conduit. Or, to use another analogy, Augustine's thoughts on teaching can serve as a nexus where pedagogy and episcopacy can meet, where pedagogical commitment to students, to ideas, and to community can inspire church leaders to rethink, to reimagine their commitment to individual believers, to creative theological engagement, and to the community of faith. I think the church's magisterium needs to be less managerial and more pedagogical. If bishops are to regain respect and authority, they cannot simply fall back on the truth of authority. I'm the bishop, I say it, that settles it. Or even, I'm the pope, I say it, and the argument is closed. Augustine dismissed that as preliminary at best. Like good teachers, our church leaders must preach and teach in ways that help the faithful move to the authority of truth. And that's a journey of discovery that we take together, just as you take that journey with your students. They must not shrink from or fear ideas and discussion and the good theological sense of the faithful. Like teachers who remain open to learning from their students, church leaders need to listen to and learn from the laity with the humility of Augustine, a humility born of hope. Like teachers, bishops need to exercise commitment to the exchange of ideas and the commerce of values. Like good teachers and principals, they need to work to build up the experience of community in the church, None of these are new ideas or ideals for the hierarchy. Yet Augustine knew that the office of bishop, like any position of authority, including teaching, including principalship, is fraught with the temptation of power, with the easy and all too convenient domination of the truth of authority. In a homily that he delivered on the anniversary of his ordination as bishop, he had this to say: "For you, I am a bishop. With you, I am a Christian. The former, bishop, is the name of an office assumed. The latter, Christian, is the name of a grace received. The former, bishop, stands for danger. The latter, for salvation." I encourage you to consider that the dedication, the discipline, the skill of your profession can model for bishops best practices that they also could apply to the many aspects of church leadership and ministry. It's perhaps not too hopeful to suggest that schools of education, especially like the Lynch School here at Boston College, could offer church leaders ways to explore effective modes of ministerial leadership that would strengthen and enrich the entire church. The best practices of the best teachers can enrich the ministerial imagination of those who serve the church as ordained leaders. Certainly, it would be a better investment than paying public relations firms to shore up the truth of authority, a practice with which Augustine would attack with all his rhetorical vigor if we were around. On the campus of Merrimack College, where I work and teach, at the entrance, there's a large bronze statue of Christ the teacher. For Augustine, finally, there is only one teacher, Christ, who dwells, he believes, in the deep inner recesses of the heart and the mind and the soul of every person. He calls Christ the inner teacher who leads each one of us to truth, who enlightens each one with understanding, inspires each one with hope. He would say, as you struggle to lead your students to the authority of truth, to that conviction of the subject matter that you're dealing with in faith, he says, Christ is working with you to lead the student to that conviction. It's a beautiful image for understanding faith, understanding teaching in the context of faith. Finally, in his commentary on Psalm 126, Augustine writes, again reflecting on his role as bishop-teacher. He says this: "In virtue of the office entrusted to us, we are your guardians, but we ourselves desire to be guarded with you. For you we are as shepherds, but under that good shepherd you and I are sheep together. In this, our office of bishop, we are for you as teachers, but under that one teacher, in this school, the church, we are your fellow students." Isn't that a great image? He subverts, in many ways, he subverts his own office. His humble, expectant attitude of learning, of openness that he models, shows how the basic principles and practices of your profession, I believe, can be one of many ingredients that are needed today to help us heal the church and strengthen it for the 21st century. Thank you. And I would be very happy to take questions and comments so we could have a discussion for a few minutes. And you don't have to go on camera to ask your question, they told me so. Now you all know how I'm feeling because you stand in front of a class or a group and nobody asks any questions. You say, oh God. It was either so clear there's nothing more to ask or nothing got across.
Thank you. My question is in relationship to your work at Merrimack. Do you try to instill these Augustinian ideals within the faculty, within all the newcomers? Do you have some kind of induction program that exposes them to this? And I think here at BC you find similar efforts to introduce kind of Ignatian spirituality notions and the Ignatian ideals of education. And it remains to be seen, really, how in a very diverse, multi-religious, secular environment those attempts are, and you might want to speak to that.
Yes. We are, in different ways. Our provost and dean of the faculty is an Augustinian friar who is by profession an educator. His expertise is in K through 12, and one of his special interests is information technology and its proper use in education. So he's tuned into these issues. And in recent years, he's been doing work in what we call Augustinian pedagogy. He just wrote an article, and we've been using that article. We've been sending it out among the faculty to say, okay, what do you think? This is in the context of work that we've been doing for about 5 years now that would be very similar to what Father Appleyard and Michael Buckley and others are doing here. Work that offers aspects of Augustinian spirituality to our faculty, whether they're Catholic, Protestant, Jewish. And we've gotten a pretty good response with that. Within that wider context of inviting faculty to reflect on what it means to be a Catholic and Augustinian college today, within that wider context, we're turning now specifically to questions of pedagogy. I have 6 students in a seminar on Augustine's thought, and we are working together on a project of say, okay, what are the elements of Augustinian pedagogy that would be applicable today in higher education? And they've just finished interviewing about 20 members of the faculty. So this has caused a stir, you know, among the faculty. We're not a big place. We have about 140 faculty members, so a little bit goes a long way. So there is interest in it, and we hope to have, just after commencement, every year we have a 3-day workshop on pedagogy. And this year we're going to be looking specifically at questions of Augustinian pedagogy. And of course, faculty love this because it's their, not only their life, it's their passion. So anytime you give them give us the opportunity to reflect on that, it's well received. And in the fall, we're looking to have another symposium on Augustinian pedagogy. So we are trying to. Now, you're right. We'll see how this happens, how it develops. But so far, it's easy with Augustine because he wrote so much about teaching, about the liberal arts in antiquity, both decrying their effects on young people, but later actually using them. So yes, we are trying to. It's the question that Catholic colleges and universities are struggling with: what makes us different, without becoming too prescriptive? What is in our culture that is unique and enriching? Ask me next year, and I'll let you know how we did. Yes, ma'am.
What impact did his mother have on him? Other than the constant prayer for his conversion, do you believe that his mother, St. Monica, had other impact on his principles?
Yes. In his confessions, he mentions his father 2 or 3 times. He mentions briefly that his father had died, but hardly mentions it. He devotes a whole book, Book 9, to his mother, and her death is a long, very, very eloquent and beautifully written testimony to her. She had a profound impact. After his conversion, he retired to the countryside outside of Milan and, in the very gentlemanly fashion of the time, began to write treatises for the intelligentsia back in Milan. He followed a very classical style of dialogue, but he puts his mother in the dialogue, The Happy Life, on The Happy Life. Monica is one of the main speakers, and she always has that little punchline at the end that sums it all up and just gets it right. So Monica had a profound influence on him in many, many ways. And of course, Augustine in Book 9 also describes his mystical experience that was shared with his mother a few days before she died. She was not ill, but a few days after this experience, she caught probably what was malaria and died in Ostia outside of Rome when they were on their way back to Africa. So profound influence. He often refers to her as our mother. So he conflates his mother and the church very often. You hear that as the subtext, our mother, referring to. He only mentions her name once, and that's right after her death. Very interesting thing, I've been doing a little reading recently. The cult of Monica was somewhat active after her death, her cult as a saint. But then, of course, right after Augustine's death, the tribes came down through Spain and swept across Africa, and basically Christianity was gone from Africa, Catholic Christianity, until the 1800s when the French brought it back. But the cult of Monica was revived with the Italian Renaissance, the late medieval, early Italian Renaissance, through the influence of a lot of the Augustinian humanists of the time in Florence and Siena. And that accompanied a rediscovery, a reappreciation, I should say, of the role of women in art and culture. So Augustine, in a sense, elevates Monica. He really makes of her the wise philosopher, which in antiquity, to put a woman in that role would be very, very unusual. To give her a voice, you don't find women speaking in the Platonic dialogues, for example. So she was extremely influential. And my students, my students aren't particularly overly religious or, great scholars of antiquity. They're just your normal American undergrads. But we just finished reading Book 9 of the Confessions, and a couple of the young women came in. They says, I cried when I read that. It's very, very powerful, moving literature. So she obviously had a profound influence on him at many levels, not only the religious level, but certainly at that level. He also says, however, that her religiosity, her experience of faith grew and developed. That when she was younger, he describes her as being in the suburbs of faith. But that later on her faith developed and matured and deepened. So there's a lot to say about his mother. Formidable woman. Formidable woman. She went about arranging his marriages and so forth. Yes, sir.
I'm interested in your the three commitments that teachers make, and I think a lot of them, certainly at the beginning, make that commitment to another person, the kids, students, and I think to the idea and the ideal. I find that the K-12 world, however, there's very little opportunity for community. The day is so frenetic. It's so fast-paced. There's so many kids around. Yeah. Adults have a difficult time even getting together for a sandwich. Do you have any recommendations of what an administrator might do in the K-12 world to bring that community out?
Yeah, that's a good question. When we have read, this is another thing we've read, is we've read Augustine's De Magistro, the teacher, with our faculty. And they really like it. I guess we've had about 45 to 50 faculty that have sat down and read that together. And they say, well, this is great. But he's talking about teaching his son. You know, I got 35 kids in class. I can't spend all this quality time. So even on the university level, it's a problem. I do not work in high school, so I can't give you particulars. But I would say on the college level, it's different. We certainly have more leisure on the college level. Although to listen to college or university professors, you wouldn't think so, but we do. But even there, unless you make an active, positive commitment to build community, it won't happen. So I guess I would pull back a step and say, what are you doing to build a sense of community? And community happens on the very human level. It can be just showing, if you're the principal or vice principal or department chair, showing personal interest in your teachers. I'm just saying what works on the college level. Despite your political or ideological differences or your fights about pay scales and all those other things that we just love to have, if you can get beyond that, to address the very human interaction, that's like sowing seeds of community. I'll give you an example. We take every year about 15 of our faculty on a pilgrimage to Italy, where we trace the steps of Augustine. And they have to prepare all year for reading, by reading and study and dialogue. And then we go, and the first year we had a very active, politically active psychologist in the Department of Psychology and another very politically active biologist who were always in the faculty senate on the absolute opposite sides of every issue. And when they discovered that each other were going on this trip, they wanted to get out of it, both of them. But we talked to them, and they became friends. They did not agree. They still don't agree. But if you take them to enough Italian restaurants and give them enough good Chianti and all that, you get beyond those political differences. So I guess I'm responding from the heart. You've got to spend time responding to, caring for, and being interested in the very human problems of your teachers. Not to give them the answers, but to give them the opportunity. And I think that works. The particular form it takes in a very busy high school is going to be different. But I think that's crucial. Augustine, Peter Brown, who's Augustine's great biographer, says the one thing after you read the Confessions that you discover is Augustine is almost never alone. He's always with friends. Even in the most critical, crucial experiences of his life, he's with people. And American society can be very isolating. I think our culture, and it seeps down into our schools, tends to push us apart. There's a great book that was written in the 60s, I think, by Philip Slater, The Pursuit of Loneliness, where he takes a look at American society, and he says, we are, as a society, designed to isolate people. So I think we got to push against that. I wish I could be more specific with the... Mary, no questions? I have to tell you, Mary Moran here is the principal of the school where both of my children have gone, and the name of the school is St. Augustine, and she's done a wonderful job with our students, our children, especially our son. We had our daughter, who was, she was good at school, good at sports, good at everything, and she's 5 years older than our son, and we couldn't figure out why other parents couldn't do this. What were they doing wrong that we obviously had down pat? Until Patrick came along. Then we'd go into school like this, hoping nobody would recognize us. Okay, thank you very much. Good evening.
I certainly think that the tacit knowledge of those who are teachers is certainly an area where many people can learn about leadership and leadership of community. And I think in that very creative way, Joe, you helped us to to see that and to reflect upon what it is to teach. And certainly that is what the Lynch School of Education is all about. So your comments are very appropriate and very helpful. In addition, certainly bringing to this Jesuit university insights into Augustinian spirituality is something that is much appreciated. So I think a lot of food for thought. Thank you for being with us, and we have refreshments, and so the conversation can continue less formally, perhaps in a less formal environment. So thank you all for coming, and Joe, thank you very much for being with us.